Over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at what populism is and what's causing it. The last piece of the puzzle is what to do about it, particularly relevant given the local election results. And here we're really thinking about the Conservatives and the Labour Party mainly. So, what next? In the analysis that we explored in the previous videos on populism, we found four big factors that kept coming up time and time again in the seats that swung towards reform. The biggest of those, the most predictive thing in the model for reform vote was the share of people without a degree. So the fewer people with a degree, the larger we expect that reform vote to be. That doesn't tell us the whole picture though, and further analysis is required to understand what exactly is happening. Is it that going to university is an experience, a liberalising experience that means that you're maybe more progressive in your values and you don't go for those populist parties? Is it that people who have a degree were more likely to be sort of anti-populist anyway? It's just those people end up going and doing a degree, and that it isn't the degree itself that changes that factor. Or is it that people without degrees just end up having a different life, perhaps because many jobs now require a degree, and so there's kind of a ceiling on social mobility. So many possible things to explore there, but clearly a key one for the parties to understand. The second big factor that came up was around immigration and community cohesion. Immigration clearly a big topic for the parties. They know that this is an area that reform is strong on and that it keeps going on about, and that is where the parties are trying to find their answers. It connects to what we saw in the model. Places that had a large but falling share of the white population were more likely to swing towards reform. So makes sense kind of that immigration is going to be a focus of efforts to fight the populist parties. But one area that's sort of less focused on now is bringing those communities together as well. So, Labour, for example, killed the National Citizen Service a few months ago, when that was one of the areas that was focusing on was to try and sort of bring people together in a more fractured world. And sort of that side of the debate is sort of less part of the conversation than the immigration side. So that's an area we would recommend that the two parties focus on. The third big thing to think about is the economy. These folk here in the Treasury obviously writing about this a lot, and they've got these great dashboards. They'll be measuring things from across the country, and one thing that might look good in some of these places is green jobs growth, which is important. Green economy, green industrial strategy, all great stuff. But when you look at places like Clacton, some of the measurements we see here might actually show pretty good green jobs growth, some of the highest in the country in that seat, which ultimately Nigel Farage won really strongly. So even when things might look great from here on those sort of dashboards and metrics, let's be careful that those things are actually translating into how people feel on the ground. Another part of that economic story from our model was on manufacturing. The model said that places that had a large but declining manufacturing base were, expected to have a higher reform vote share, and that clearly you can see that playing through into Farage's platform with the reindustrialisation discussions and nationalisation of British Steel. All of these kinds of things are speaking to those seats where they've seen a large but falling manufacturing base. Last thing to pick up on here is levelling up. Not a term we hear that much of these days, but we actually found that seats that had received or been pledged to receive more levelling up funding tended to be a factor that brought down the reform vote in the model. Whether that actually did in practice, we'll see. But that's what the model said. It could be that it is the actual fact of that levelling up funding being spent. Could be that just it was not the actual spending of it. It could just be that the fact that it was announced and people felt that sort of created a good vibe. Or it could just be that the way that the funds were allocated were kind of allocated to places that were maybe less likely to ultimately have a large reform vote. So what exactly is happening there? The causation and the correlation of those things is hard to unpick. But anyway, interesting things to look at. The last factor to talk about is crime. We found that places with a higher level of crime were expected to have a higher reform vote according to the model. We also saw that the places with the 20 highest seats with a large reform vote were also more likely to experience crimes like vandalism and arson. So clearly this is an area that needs continued focus, community policing, etc., and an area that we need to understand a bit more the connection between the crime rate, how that plays through into people's sort of establishment sense. So there you have it. Those are our four themes of the populism research. Number one, education and the non-degree vote. Number two, immigration and social cohesion. Number 3, the economy and how to make people feel growth on the ground. Number 4, crime. We saw in the local elections that reform vote we saw in the general election is just strengthening. That populist sentiment is strengthening. So these areas are clearly not being addressed so far by the government in any sort of sufficient way. As a think tank, we want to basically understand these 4 themes in more detail. We're going to do more detailed analysis on these areas, understand what it is about them, those themes that we've seen, how that connects to what people are actually feeling, and sort of what's driving them towards populism. And hopefully, so we can come up with some recommendations that the mainstream parties can use to help sort of address some of these concerns.